They say our blood remembers. But what happens when it remembers something we were never told? Abuela always swore we came from noble Spaniards, clean blood, Castilian lineage, blue eyes in a black and brown land. The family crest still hangs on the living room wall, polished every year like a holy relic. Then someone takes a DNA test, and the silence begins. Not European. Not entirely. A spike of West African ancestry. A jagged strand from Yucatan. Maybe even both. Quiet at first, like a whisper under the floorboards, then undeniable. Mind's real. Faces tighten. That can't be right, they say. The test must be broken. But it's not. The numbers don't lie. It's the stories that did. For centuries, Mestizo identity was stitched together not by memory, but by omission. 1,000 family trees trimmed into symmetry, where every inconvenient branch was pruned, erased, forgotten. The conquest didn't just take land. It rearranged ancestry. It taught people how to forget. A national myth was born, that we are the beautiful blend of two worlds, European fathers and indigenous mothers, meeting in the twilight of empire. But where was Africa in that myth? Where were the thousands enslaved, baptized, renamed, folded into the story, then folded out? Where were the unrecorded unions, the erased mothers, the forbidden lineages passed down in secret and skin? This wasn't just forgetting. It was design. Colonial powers didn't just classify people, they classified memory. They taught entire nations to speak only of certain roots, to elevate the white blood, even when it was a drop in the ocean. And now the genome speaks, in percentages, in silence, in shame. 1 million family myths unraveling at once. But if the story we believed was crafted to hide, then what exactly was it hiding? Because somewhere beneath these numbers, under layers of blood and centuries of forgetting, is the beginning, the first fracture in the lie, the lineage they tried to bury, and the man who lived it. But who was he? And why was he so dangerous? In colonial courts, a name could be a sentence. Mestizo, they whispered, not a badge of honor, but a warning. It didn't mean mixed. Not really. Not always. Sometimes it meant bastard, illegitimate, stained, stamped into birth records, etched onto parish rolls, a code disguised as a classification. You could be the son of a Spanish merchant and an indigenous noblewoman and still be called lesser, not because of your blood, but because of how it was remembered and who did the remembering. This wasn't just society. It was design, a bureaucratic caste system, inked in law, enforced in pulpits, engineered to protect the myth of European purity. And the penalties were real. Wrong classification? You lost your land, lost your name, lost the right to marry upward, or to inherit anything at all. A child born of the same two people could be labeled differently in two towns, 2 generations apart, depending on who was watching and who they wanted you to be. Mestizo was a moving target, a tool, a weapon. Sometimes it elevated. More often it erased. Behind every certificate was a quiet transaction, your identity in exchange for silence. Hide your grandmother's skin tone. Change the town you're from. Speak Spanish, not Nahuatl. Shave the past down until it fits the page. But now, centuries later, the blood speaks back. Genomes don't ask permission. They don't lie for politics. A test today can pull apart what an empire stitched together with surgical precision. That 6% African you never knew. That indigenous lineage buried under 4 Spanish surnames. The system tried to script every life. But what happens when the script is broken? What happens when a man walks into the archives, part noble, part native, fully dangerous, because he refuses to check the box they gave him? And he knows the truth of who he is, not from a priest, not from a ledger, but from the mother who bore him, and the lands that claimed him. They called him Mestizo, but he called himself heir. In the new kingdom of Granada, they called him Don Diego de Torres, a nobleman, a cacique, a contradiction. His mother was Muisca royalty, descended from sacred lineages that stretched back before conquest had a name. His father? Spanish, blood of the crown, tied to the empire that burned those lineages down. He walked between worlds, and neither one trusted him. To the Spaniards, he was too native, too comfortable speaking the old tongue, too bold in claiming land they thought theirs by right. To the natives, he wore too much velvet and too many crosses. But Don Diego didn't flinch. He inherited power through his mother, matrilineal, sacred, indigenous, and he wielded it with a Spanish name. He ruled, not begged, and that made him dangerous, because he shattered the illusion, the fantasy that rule must come from pure blood, unmixed and divine. The empire needed categories, Indian or Spaniard, ruler or ruled. Don Diego was both, and neither. The court tried to strip his titles. Priests challenged his legitimacy. Colonial officers whispered about his birth like it was a crime. He stood in the courtroom not as a petitioner, but as a symbol. Proof that the system could be bent, and that bloodlines weren't as controllable as the castes wanted them to be. He was a living glitch in the empire's design. A mestizo noble, with power too ancient to ignore, and a lineage too mixed to contain. They called him an anomaly. But what if he was the blueprint? Because 5 centuries later, his story is being told again. Not by scribes, not in courts, but in sequences, A's, T's, G's, and C's, stitched deep inside living bones. And as those genomes whisper their truths, the old questions return. What makes a ruler? What makes a people? What happens when biology proves him right, centuries after they tried to erase his claim? Beneath a cracked church floor in central Mexico, the bones don't lie. They've been buried for centuries, cradled in soil, kissed by time, silent. Until now. Gloved hands lift a fragment of femur, dull and worn. A single molar, still rooted. They bag it, scan it, send it to a lab where machines hum like ghosts awakening. No names. No birth records. Just base pairs, billions of them. And suddenly, history breathes. Structure. Admixmap. Algorithms decoding ancestry, like ancient secrets cracked open under fluorescent light. Mexico City, a city of Aztec echoes and Mestizo pride, reveals its genetic mirror. Not one image, but kaleidoscope. One person shows 21% European ancestry. Another, 70%. Both born just blocks apart. How? The bones answer quietly. It's not the flag you wave. It's the blood you carry. And sometimes they don't match. The archaeologist had expected patterns. Smooth curves. A national blend. But what she found was jagged. Uneven. Raw. A man labeled Mestizo, with 85% indigenous genome. A merchant's daughter with unbroken African mitochondrial lines, generations long denied, yet pulsing beneath skin and dust. And everywhere, the same question hangs in the air like desert heat. Who are we, when the paper trails lie? Family stories fade. Surnames mislead. But the DNA remembers. Not just the Spanish soldier, but the enslaved woman buried without a marker. Not just the noble, but the Nahua midwife, the Maya courier, the child born in silence between conquest and rebellion. Each genome is a mosaic, fractured by war, sealed by marriage, stained by power. But across these chaotic sequences, one pattern refuses to disappear. One design stitched into every region, every class, every name. Too sharp, too consistent, too loud to ignore. Because in every sample, from highlands to coasts, one echo grows clearer. The conquerors didn't just write the records. They rewrote the bodies. But the bodies kept score. And now, one chromosomal thread keeps returning. Over and over. A signal, so intimate, so persistent. It reshapes the entire idea of how this mixture began. Start with the Y chromosome. It's passed from father to son, unchanged, like a secret whispered through centuries. And in Mestizo DNA, it tells a brutal story. Because nearly every European ancestor was a man. Now trace the mitochondrial line, the mother's code. And suddenly, the story shifts. Native. African. Again and again. The mothers were never Spanish. Not once. Not anywhere. This wasn't a love story. It was design. The genome doesn't blink. It lays out the truth, chromosome by chromosome. European blood rides in on the Y, a cavalry of male lineage, sharp and dominant. But the X, the mitochondria, they come from the women who were conquered, not courted. It's not just a pattern. It's a pattern of pain. The math doesn't lie. The X chromosome, passed down from mothers, carries far more Native and African ancestry than any other marker. A genetic scream, muffled but unbroken. It tells us what the archives refuse to admit, that the creation of the Mestizo wasn't born in union. It was born in imbalance. It was born in the shadow of power, in missions, in plantations, in barracks and haciendas, where names weren't given, only taken, where the man's lineage would be remembered and the woman's erased. And now, every modern genome echoes that silence. The father's surname survived. The mother's suffering did too, coded in fragments, in percentages, in a map of who we really come from. Somewhere in those strands, buried between autosomes and whispered in SNPs, is the reality that no one wanted written. The Mestizo body was not shaped by blending. It was shaped by dominance, by power, rewritten as ancestry. And the question that haunts us isn't just who we are. It's how we got here. Because if every European lineage came from a man, and every maternal line leads to those who could not choose, then what if every family story began with a power imbalance? It starts as a rumor, a glance, a whisper, a question no one answers. Why is Tio Javier's hair so tight? Why did Abuela always wear long sleeves in the summer? No one talks about it. Not directly. Just a shrug, a smile, a change of subject. Until the DNA test comes back. And suddenly, silence has a number. 3%. 5. Maybe 7. African. A lineage nobody claimed, but everybody shaped. For generations, families polished their Spanish surnames like silverware, told stories of hidalgos and conquistadors, maybe a brave indigenous great-grandmother, but never, never, the grandmother who didn't pass, because her skin was too dark, and her name was dropped at the border. She cooked in the back room, not the dining room. She didn't speak at weddings, and when her photo faded, no one replaced it. The test doesn't show a face, just the truth. West African haplogroup, passed from mother to mother, a voice buried beneath centuries of whitening, surviving in the bloodstream like a soft rebellion. This isn't about percentage. It's about presence. A drop of blood that once meant chains. A feature that once meant shame. A memory rewritten until it vanished. But the genome doesn't forget. It doesn't care about national myths. It doesn't care about census boxes. It simply reveals what we've refused to name. And in doing so, it raises the ache of every erased ancestor. The women stolen across oceans. The children baptized without their mother's tongue. The entire history of a continent, compressed into a sliver of genetic code, just waiting to be seen. Because this is an absence. It's erasure. Deliberate. Systematic. Generational. We didn't lose Africa. We buried it. So now the question isn't whether that ancestry is there. It's why we hid it. Why grandmothers went unnamed. Why hair was straightened. Why pride became silence. Because if Africa's presence was silenced, who silenced it? You'd think after 5 centuries of conquest, conversion, and mixing, the past would blur. But the genome doesn't forget where it came from. Zoom in on the map. Yucatan, Oaxaca, Sonora, each region carrying a different rhythm, a different code. One shaped by jungle temples, another by desert trade, a third by mountain prayer. And all of it still inside the blood. Scientists expected a blend, a homogeneous mestizo wash. But when they ran the data, something strange happened. The genes didn't blend. They held their ground. Maya markers, sharp and specific, locked inside the DNA of people who no longer speak the language, no longer dance the old rites. Yet their cells do. That woman in Merida who cooks with Achiode and swears her family is all Spanish, her genome says otherwise. The alleles in her blood, the immune responses, the liver enzymes, all trace back to Maya farmers and healers. In Oaxaca, the gene still whispers Zapotec. The language might be fading, but the DNA? It's fluent. And up in Sonora, where the landscape is dry and the skin runs lighter, indigenous ancestry still glows in the genome, different from both Maya and Zapotec. 3 regions, 3 civilizations, 3 genetic dialects still alive. And here's the twist. In some cases, the DNA in today's mestizo populations is more intact, more traceable, than in the shrinking indigenous communities nearby. Because when culture was crushed, when temples were burned, and names replaced. The genes fled underground, into families who'd forget, into faces that would blend, into lungs, bones, and bloodlines, waiting to be recognized, not as relics, but as survivors. So maybe the question isn't whether indigenous heritage survived the conquest. Maybe the question is, what if the memory of a civilization lives inside its erasure? He called it La Raza Cosmica, the cosmic race. A grand fusion of all colors, all peoples, all histories. One future, one blood. José Vasconcelos dreamed of a nation beyond race, where Spaniard and Indian, African and Asian, would blend into something higher. It was poetic, revolutionary, beautiful, and also a lie, because behind that dream was a scalpel, cutting away what didn't fit. Indigenous languages, outdated. African features, faded in paintings. The brown body was praised, but only the version that leaned light. The cosmic race had a preferred shade, and that dream, sold as unity, became a filter, a standard. It told people who to marry, who to hide, who to forget. It told schools what to teach, doctors what to assume. And DNA, the very thing that made mestizage real, was ignored in policy, erased from the charts, sterilized into averages. But science, unlike statecraft, doesn't care for ideals. It found what the dream left out. Ancestry patterns that shift not just culture, but medicine. Genes tied to indigenous lungs, to African heart rhythms, to enzymes shaped by centuries of maize, salt, migration, and silence. Yet health systems still treat all mestizos the same. One body, one race, one treatment plan. And people pay for that lie with misdiagnosis, late detection, bad outcomes. The dream blurred the lines, but biology keeps them sharp. It's not division, it's precision, because what's in your blood can't be healed if it isn't seen. And the irony, the very genetic diversity that Vasconcelos tried to wrap in poetry, may be the exact thing that saves lives. If we stop flattening it, if we stop pretending that one story, one cosmic narrative, is enough to carry all our truths. Because now, as scientists decode what mestizage really means, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. The genes they erased may be the key to survival. She couldn't breathe. A young mother from Sonora, 32, healthy, no history, until the coughing started. Doctors said asthma. Routine. Common among Latinos. They gave her the standard dosage, the one designed for the average patient. But the air didn't come back. What they didn't see was buried in her blood, because her lungs weren't average. Her ancestry wasn't either. In Latin America, lung function varies up to 7% between regions. 7. That's the difference between life and misdiagnosis. A man from Yucatan, descended from Maya ancestors who lived in humid jungle air, carries different pulmonary traits than someone born in Sonora's dry highlands. But the system doesn't see Maya, doesn't see Sonoran. It sees one label, Latino, and treats them all the same. This isn't just statistics. It's survival. Because genome diversity is an abstract. It shapes how bodies absorb oxygen, process sugar, respond to medication. A diagnosis that fits in Peru can fail in Mexico. A treatment that works in Oaxaca may harm in Colombia. But the myth of sameness persists. The legacy of mestizage said we were all one people. That difference was erased for progress, and medicine followed suit. Today, patients walk into clinics with unique genetic signatures, but leave with generic prescriptions. And the irony is cruel. The very history we were taught to silence, the indigenous ancestry we buried, the African blood we forgot, holds the clues to personalized care, to healing. But first, we have to stop flattening ourselves. Stop calling Latino a medical category when it's a continent of contradictions. Because to survive, we must see what was hidden, not just in the family tree, but in the lungs, the liver, the chromosomes. We must look back to move forward. But the question now isn't scientific. It's human. Because if our bodies remember what the system forgot, can a health crisis force us to confront historical injustice? It starts with a name. Faded ink on a baptism record, a priest's cramped handwriting, a town that no longer exists. and then a cheek swab. Nothing dramatic. Just a little spit into a vial, mailed across oceans. Weeks later, the results come in, and something cracks open. Your great-grandmother wasn't from Galicia. She was born in Oaxaca. Your uncle's last name wasn't inherited. It was assigned by a plantation ledger. And the man they said was Spanish? Half of his genome points to West Africa. These aren't stories passed down. They're stories dug up. Not from the ground, but from the genome. From digitized church archives. From hidden census books. From Y chromosomes that refuse to lie. Suddenly, people who grew up being told to straighten their hair are finding pride in the coils. Elders who buried their native words are hearing them echoed in their descendant cells. What once felt like shame now feels like proof. Because when the state forgot you, your blood remembered. And now, people are using it. Petitions filed. Land claims reopened. Afro-descendant and indigenous communities demanding seats, funding, space, backed by science and story. Not just for recognition, but for restitution. Because a genome isn't neutral. It's power. It challenges the myth that only elites write history. Now, a 23andMe kit and a PDF from 1786 can tear down 3 generations of erasure. Not to destroy the past, but to reclaim it. Not to rewrite identity, but to finally choose it. The archive is no longer locked in stone walls and dusty scrolls. It's under your skin. But there's a catch. Because if genes can speak, if they can remember the silenced, resurrect the stolen, reveal the erased, then someone will try to shape what they say. Someone will try to gatekeep what counts and what doesn't. So the question isn't just what the data shows. It's deeper. If genes can tell the truth, who controls the narrative? There's a boy in Guadalajara who still calls himself Spanish. Not out of pride, but tradition. His family says they came from Asturias. Clean blood, old roots. But his genome doesn't care about stories. It shows African on his father's side, Zapotec on his mother's, and a fragment of something else, unlabeled, unplaceable. He laughs when he sees the results, then goes quiet. Because what do you do when the map inside you doesn't match the one you were taught to follow? This isn't just about DNA. It's about dissonance between what you feel and what the facts demand. A grandmother says you're Castilian. A chromosome says you're not. The mirror says Mestizo, but the mirror never explains how you got there. And that's the tension we can't shake. Science can trace lineages, build trees, decode ancestries with microscopic accuracy. But it can't tell you who you are. Not really. Because identity lives in memory. In the food you eat. The language you dream in. The silence you inherit. Still, the body remembers. It carries conquest in its bones. Resistance in its blood. Silence in its mitochondrial lines. And every test we take, every ancestor uncovered, reveals another contradiction. You are more than one story. You are the consequence of 1,000 collisions. The genome doesn't lie. But what you do with that truth, that's the real question. Because this isn't over. The markers keep shifting. The definitions keep evolving. And somewhere, just beyond the last confirmed haplogroup, another puzzle waits. One that doesn't begin in Mexico. One that starts in the Pacific, in a chain of islands once ruled by Spain. Where mestizo doesn't mean what you think it does. Where a single DNA strand rewrote the entire national myth. So, if you're ready to follow that thread, subscribe. Because next, we unravel how Filipino mestizos shattered their own origin story, and how one unexpected marker exposed everything.